In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up this week, the University of Cyprus Oceanography Centre is mapping changes in the Arctic Ocean.
Try to make sure people understand what we really know and what is conjecture. And being able to maybe not make a recommendation about what to do about it directly, but at least make sure we all understand what we really know and what we don't know.
And how honest are people in interview situations or indeed in everyday life? We talk about the art of deception.
Companies might come to us for the interview process, so for us to be able to ascertain if a candidate is being dishonest or deceitful within the interview process.
The Oceanography Centre at the University of Cyprus has recently signed a research agreement for climate monitoring in the Arctic Ocean. To tell us all about what they're looking for and how the information will be used, we welcome to the programme this week Dr. Daniel Hayes, who's a research scientist at the Oceanography Centre at the University of Cyprus. So, Daniel, thanks for joining us. Can you outline what it is you're looking for and indeed what the data you collect will help us to understand?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. First of all, what we're looking for is how the ocean is circulating throughout the globe, in particular how the water is moving from the mid-latitudes towards the northern latitudes, which is basically driving the whole climate of the Earth's system. And to do that, we're hoping to look at the temperatures and salinity of the water as it's moving through the Arctic, transition from Atlantic to Arctic oceans. This is using basically sensors on instruments that go up and down in the ocean.
That's your glider, is it? It looks an extraordinary piece of equipment. And tell us how it works.
Yeah, so a glider is basically a small underwater vehicle. It's controlled by a computer that's running inside. It runs basically on autopilot and goes up and down the ocean in upper 1,000 meters. And it uses a special pump to change its buoyancy. So instead of a propeller like a normal underwater vehicle, it inflates and deflates a small balloon and becomes quite dense compared to the surrounding water, and then when it reaches the depth, it inflates and starts to rise to the surface. All the while it's measuring information along the way, so thermometers and other sensors.
Now, you mentioned that it measures the flow of water from, let's say, I suppose, the mid-Atlantic and up and so on. The water that's further south is warmer, isn't it? And I want to know about the flow there, because we've seen a lot of melting ice in the Arctic, and whether or not La Niña and El Niño, what effect they have on where the water travels to.
Yeah, so the ocean is a very complex system, so it's very difficult to pinpoint the reasons why water is moving from one place to another. But it's definitely true that there are natural oscillations like El Niño and La Niña, but it's also true that there is some steady circulation. So this in particular is the Gulf Stream moving up from the southern area, from the United States, moving northward, and transporting that warm water which goes into the Arctic and then is cooled through cooling from the atmosphere. This does change over time, and it's hard to know what's a normal state, what's a simple oscillation, what's a human-induced state. And so it's important to measure these things, and it's unfortunately quite difficult in the Arctic to do so because of the remoteness and the harsh conditions.
Which is where your glider, I suppose, comes in. Where's it operated from? Because you're doing this, I think, in collaboration with the Sorbonne.
That's right. The Sorbonne University in Paris and the University of Cyprus have signed this new agreement. And it's definitely a collaborative effort. There are other institutions involved, but to get the glider in the water is one task. So we have people there in the northern parts of the ocean, Atlantic Ocean. But then the glider is actually actually communicating back to Cyprus through satellite. So I'm able to control the motion of that, the direction it's going, and also see the results coming in every few hours. So I'm allowed to sort of adapt the mission as we go in order to investigate a particular current or a particular feature that we've noticed.
Right, now then, how long does this data collection go on for? And then I imagine it will have collected so much data. How long is it going to take you to go through it all?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, it depends a bit on how you drive the system, because it runs on batteries which are not rechargeable, and they just they eventually die. So we tend to be very conservative and try to manage our battery pack, and when we do that, we can even go for 6 months continuously, measuring up and down in this way. In this case, we finished just the other day after 2 months. We've traveled over 1,500 kilometers and collected 1,000 profiles or so. This will definitely take some time to go through. We share that as a team, as a research group internationally, and we all take our part and analyze it down to the last detail, compare it with older data, compare it with models. It's a years-long process, and there's always more you can do with these kind of rich data sets.
Right, I think I'm right in saying that one of the other things that it's looking at is the phytoplankton. Now, that is very much dependent, is it not, on the temperature of the water, and that is basically the bottom line when it comes to creatures further up the food chain.
Yes, no, in fact, that's a really strong advantage of this instrument, is that we can get some information about what kind of particles are in the water, including phytoplankton. It's a function of temperature, yes, also the amount of sunlight that's entering the ocean, so it's a seasonal, even a daily effect. And it does provide sort of a measure of where the ocean is being productive, in other words, where there's more life. So that is a sort of second-order level of study, not just what is the temperature of the water, but what impacts is that having on the ecosystem in that area, and how does that change over time. So it's a rich data set for sure.
And when you've been through all this data, what use can it be put to?
Well, it can help a lot to understand what is happening at the moment and what's projected to happen in the future in terms of the circulation of the ocean and those impacts I mentioned on the ecosystem. Without this information, we would be restricted to computer models, and we all know after even a few days our weather forecast even here is maybe not so accurate. Imagine trying to make a forecast from something in a remote location where we have almost no information and trying to project that for years. We really don't have a good idea of what to expect in the future without real observations. That's really what we're after, trying to understand where we are now and where we're headed into the future.
And that, of course, should have an impact, one might hope, on policy and what can be done. If you do find, as everybody suspects, that the oceans are getting warmer, the ice is melting faster, then we'll have rising sea levels and so on. This information will be passed on presumably to governments and things, but are there any practical solutions that the scientists who gather this information can suggest?
Well, it's difficult. Scientists tend to focus on science, so it's a bit, one has to be a bit daring to make policy suggestions when you're trained in mathematics and physics and chemistry and so on. So, and on the other hand, if scientists don't do that, who will? So I think what we can do as scientists is try to make sure people understand what we really know and what is conjecture. So there's some really solid observations from many, many different platforms, many different universities, organizations, and being able to maybe not make a recommendation about what to do about it directly, but at least make sure we all understand what we really know and what we don't know. And then hopefully that can start a discussion that's based on facts and not based on, well, I heard this or I heard that, or conjecture or something that may not be based in fact. So that's as far as I'm comfortable going at the moment, but definitely there are impacts to our society, so we definitely have to start that conversation.
And this is all, I presume, somewhere online that people listening to this, if they want to see the pictures and find out more, can go along and have a look at. So where should they head to online?
If they just want to Google or do another search on oceanography, glider, and Cyprus, they'll come up with our University of Cyprus website. There's also a site called oceangliders.org, O-R-G. That's a global effort, collaborating with other groups. You can see all kind of maps and data there, and you can get an idea of where people are doing this kind of work, and it links to what are some of the results that came out of that.
Well, it sounds fascinating. It's good to know that you're not the only ones doing it, and I presume pretty well all the oceans in some part or another are being mapped in this way. Daniel Hayes, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
We've talked before on the programme, many times in fact, especially in the wake of the Ayia Napa rape case, about police procedures on the island and indeed about the integrity sometimes of the evidence that's brought to court. Now, we talked back then about the importance of recording interviews with suspects, and we were promised by various MPs that it was on the cards. I haven't actually checked whether anything has happened with regard to that as yet. I rather suspect not. But it seems an apposite introduction to my next guest on this week's programme. He is the co-CEO of Micro Expressions Solutions. His name is Anto Parayan. Anto, will you start by explaining what your company does? Because I think it's very much involved in the things I just mentioned in my introduction.
Okay, fantastic. So the company was formed in 2009. It's a private entity started by a lady called Omori Kemp, her background is clinical psychology. And the reason why she started this was it delves into the information of people being deceptive. So the company has courses which are online, and we also offer services, for example, deceptionology, whereby companies will come to us and they would use our services to be able to find out if someone is lying within the company, if they're accused of something. Companies might come to us for the interview process, so for us to be able to ascertain if a candidate is being dishonest or deceitful within the interview process. We are involved in court cases, reading statements. We are involved in court cases, looking at interrogation clips. So the company was formed to be able to provide a better service to the community, and to be able to help people understand when someone is lying to you. That's the whole gist of the company and the ethos of the company.
Which we're not very good at as a rule, I think, because body language is something that a lot of people just simply ignore.
Exactly.
They don't read the signs that they're not looking me in the eye, or they're scratching their nose, or there are some very obvious things that people do when they're uncomfortable with what they're saying, which is often, unless they're psychopathic, I imagine, when they're not telling the truth and they're worried that they'll be found out.
Exactly. So part of our courses, we delve in three different aspects. We delve in the micro-expressions. So what is your face telling me without you knowing? So subconsciously, what are you telling me when I'm asking a specific question about a specific situation? So that's the first thing that we analyze. The second thing is word usage or statement analysis. So you might be telling me a story, or you might be writing a story or a statement, but there's certain things that you are leaving out subconsciously, which indicates that you know more than what you're saying, or you are not telling the truth. And the third aspect, or the third cluster as we call it, is body language. What is your body telling me? So when we look at a interrogation clip or an interview clip, initially we analyze it without the voice, without the audio. We look at the person's appearance, what is it that they're doing, their body language, and the micro expressions. And then we get specific signs, like you would in a polygraph where the needle goes up and down. We go back to that specific timing and we see what the question was from the investigator and what the response was. And if we see that there's a specific baseline of deception, then we know that the following questions asked when the person was doing this, or that, we know that there is a lot more than what he or she is telling us. Generally speaking, people are really bad at understanding when someone is lying to them because we are very good liars. I mean, it's human nature. We lie many times a day about simple things, about silly things. I love drinking coffee. In the meantime, the person hates coffee. Have you tried green tea? Oh, I love it. But in the meantime, I've never had green tea. So people lie for even the silly things, but we're actually good at lying. What we're not good at is to be able to ascertain when someone is actually lying, to be able to pick up those cues.
But we also surely actually rather like to give somebody, particularly if it's somebody we know, the benefit of the doubt. So we wouldn't immediately think that they were fibbing.
Exactly.
Because they're friends.
Yes. So, for example, the question of the green tea, I had a friend and I said, do you drink green tea? And he said, yeah, I've had it a couple of times. And I said, when was the last time that you had it? And he said, oh, I can't remember. So the thing is that when you start lying and you create a story, you always have to backtrack and remember what the lie was. And people are very bad at this, first of all. Second of all, when someone is lying to you and they try to explain to you a story, what they will do is you'll say, okay, can you tell me that story but in reverse order? So can you start from the end of the story to the beginning? They can't, because the brain can't function to go back to what they said and then, how did the story begin? It's like when someone tells you they got a traffic fine today for speeding on the highway. They're not going to tell you, oh, Rosie, you know what? I woke up this morning, it was 6:30. I woke up, I brushed my teeth, I had my coffee, I had my cereal. They're going to say, you know what? Today I got a fine of 120 euros. And you're going to say, but what are you talking about? Tell me the story. What happened? It was on the highway to Limassol. And you're going to say, I get this, but what happened? Like, tell me the story. And then they'll give you bits and pieces. When someone is telling you a story which is real, they will tell you the things that come to their mind, which they feel more passionate or more emotion about. And usually when someone's telling you the truth about a story, it doesn't really make sense until they go from start to finish, right? But when someone tells you the story from start to finish, and this we've seen multiple times on rape cases, where they give you every single detail as if you were reading a book, right? You know that something's not right, because I will not tell you a bad event that's happened to me from the morning when I woke up all the way until the event. I will tell you the event, how I felt, what I smelled, all the sensory functions, and then I will fill in the gaps of that story.
But surely, hang on a minute there, you're talking rape case, you're under interrogation. So they're going to ask you to tell the story from the beginning very often. Now, is that a fault of police interrogation techniques? Should they do it some other way?
Well, if you look at interrogation clips on YouTube that you have police interrogating someone or questioning someone in the US or the UK, they don't go to tell me what happened right in the morning. They say, okay, so we hear, what happened. What happened is an open-ended question, right? And for someone who's gone through that experience, they won't say, well, I woke up in the morning, it was a beautiful day, the birds were chirping. They would say, I got raped. My car got stolen. That's why I'm here. And then the investigators, they will start asking bits and pieces of questions. So, okay, what do you mean got stolen? What got stolen? Where was the car parked?
All right, but let me also ask you about the fact that if, for example, you've survived an attempted murder or
Yes.
you've been raped, something really psychologically damaging,
Yes.
the natural reaction is to block out some of what happened.
Yes.
And it may be very difficult for you to recall across that mental blockage
Correct.
what actually happened.
And that's why the person who's investigating or probing or asking the questions should be able to ascertain whether or not you are suffering from that distress from that event, or are you just simply just telling a story to get attention? It can be for any reason. Or is it just something that you've seen on TV and you're trying to relive that because it just seemed real to you? This happened on multiple cases in Canada. So someone said, I killed someone. He went to the police station and said, I killed someone. And he gave details, gruesome details of this is what I did, this is what I did. And eventually the police went to the house of that specific address and they found the occupants there alive. Well, everything was okay. And they went back to the police station and said, but everyone is okay. What are you talking about? And he said, no, I went and I killed this person and these are the steps that I followed. Now, obviously mentally disturbed, but the way that he explained the story was you could have only said that if you had actually done this. And he was basing it on a movie or a series that he had watched, that's what happened in the movie. So he used the same type of process and explanation to the police, and the police believed him because they said, hold on, but this is too real. It's happened. It has to have happened.
Okay, let's move off the police and the crime scene. Let's talk about how these sort of things apply in the corporate world. People come in for interviews.
Yes.
It's not just, though, the body language. Interviews are stressful situations.
Agreed.
So it could just be the fact that you take a liking to somebody or you don't. Do we gel? Do I think this person is right in my company situation?
Correct.
Even if they perhaps don't have the qualifications I asked for or whatever. How do you put all of that into this same thing of interview techniques? Because the other thing I've noticed is that a lot of modern day interview techniques ask such off-the-wall questions, you think, what is that all about?
Where is this applicable to?
Yes,
correct. So our services are mainly, we are observing the interview. So we let the HR manager or manageress conduct the interview as they would within their normal processes and procedures. What we do is we literally sit in the corner and observe the person who's being interviewed. Now, when someone is nervous, you can tell when someone is nervous from the body language, from the posture, from the words that they're using. When someone is lying, you can ascertain when someone is lying or not. Now, one example I can give you is that a couple of months ago, a candidate walked into a company and he said, I've applied for this position, these are my credentials, this is my CV. They looked at the CV, they said, fantastic, let's ask you a couple of questions. And the person was positive, confident, and you could not budge him. Any questions they were asking, he was giving the answers as if he knew what the questions were prior to the questions being asked. And they asked him a question about his education, and in his CV he had written that he had studied in Harvard. He had obtained his degree from Harvard. And when they mentioned this, his body language completely changed from that confident person to the person that just wants to get over this question. And he said, yes, I've studied at Harvard, but in Cyprus it's very difficult to find a job. So he diverted that question to something completely different, which is a clear sign of someone trying to be deceitful. But the HR managers didn't pick this up, and they carried on with the interview, and they carried on, and they liked the guy. So just before the end of the interview, I said, can I just say one quick question? And the HR manager was like, yeah, sure, of course. And I went to the candidate and I said, we mentioned about the Harvard education, is that correct? And he said, yes, drinking water, losing eye contact with me and looking at the HR manager. And I said, can you tell me a little bit about that experience? Because Harvard is an old university, there's a lot of culture. I mean, what were the classrooms like? How did it smell like? The wood? What did the campus look like? The teachers, the professors? And he said, it was okay, it's like a normal university. And I thought that was pretty strange, because this is Harvard, right? And I dug a bit deeper and I said, did you stay on campus? Did you stay off campus? And he said, I wasn't really taking classes every day at Harvard. And I said, how does that happen? And he said, it was distance learning. So he did a degree, he got his degree from Harvard, but it was distant learning from his house in probably Nicosia. Now, this isn't a big lie, but I'm asking a question and you should be honest in saying, I didn't attend the university, it was online. I'm not going to judge you any differently. But when you're trying to say something that's not true, you're falling into the trap and you have to build that lie. That's why I was telling you that if it's a lie, you have to build a story on a story. It's like a fairy tale, but the fairy tale doesn't end. It keeps on growing more. So then the company said, okay, hold on, but if you're lying about your education, what else are you lying about? This is from the HR manageress. And the candidate became putty. The confidence fell away. Everything he was saying, he was stuttering, because he knew that certain pieces within his CV were fictitious or exaggerated, like his duties and responsibilities in the previous company, his academic scoring.
Okay, so he was caught out. I mean, that's what you do as a job. Is it widely taken up by companies in Cyprus? Do you work abroad? Where is your main customer base for this?
Our main clientele base is in South Africa and the UK. We've started recently in Cyprus, and the reason why we started recently in Cyprus is because people in Cyprus are not used to this type of skill set, and they still don't understand not only the benefits but how to use it. Cyprus is not really ready for this yet, because they're on the old basis of If you don't look at me, you're guilty. If you're crossing arms, you're not being open. If you're not answering my questions, it means that you're lying. No, these things are old school. But slowly the companies in Cyprus for the recruiting phase is what we're using. And obviously we're trying to enter the universities to be able to teach students about body language, the importance of body language, what words to use in an interview and in presentation, what kind of communication do you have to have with your boss in order to get a raise or a promotion.
On the other hand, I'll throw this one at you. It's a little bit like media training. You can teach people how to reply in interview situations to media questions, for example.
Yes.
And
which Donald Trump does a really bad job of.
Well, in my job, it's absolutely brilliant when I come across particularly perhaps a politician who's done no media training whatsoever. You can lead them by the nose to the big drop and in they go.
Watch.
Right? But the point is, when you do interview somebody who's done it, they have all the same bridges to the next thing, the things they'll say to gain a little bit of time to think about what the answer should be. And suddenly, the interview is no longer genuine in a way, so you're almost teaching people how to lie. Or I'm teaching them how to avoid answering my questions truthfully.
So I agree with that statement, correct. One of the most important things is, if you're speaking to someone and you're not getting the answers you should be getting, so they're telling you exactly what you want to hear, that's when people will throw different questions. So for example, like I say, where did you park your car today? And you'll think, but that's not relevant. That breaks your psyche and your thought concentration. Your train of thought breaks. And for you to be able to switch back to what you were doing in your train of thought and who you are and to be put back into character might take you a couple of minutes. So after me asking you where did you park your car, I will say, but by the way, did you know anything about that embezzlement from that company? Did you sign the check? Did you hire the CFO, right? And that's why some investigators, they use that technique even in the police force in the United States. When they pull someone over, they don't say, madam, you were fined, you were speeding, or you were driving skew, are you under influence? They ask general questions. Where are you from? Where are you going? Do you have your license? And then they kind of mold that into, did you have anything to drink? So I'm here to be your friend. I'm not here to put you in prison or to give you a fine. What
about your day-to-day chats with friends over coffee and things? You're in danger of, in a sense, bringing down relationships to how good am I at interpreting whether or not you're being genuine here, telling the truth or whatever. And then surely that could disrupt any relationship.
Usually it does, because relationships, they fail because of lack of communication and lack of trust. So, divorces happen because people don't communicate with each other anymore. Friendships, they break up because they don't communicate with each other, or they don't trust each other. So it's either one or the other. What we're doing is we're just trying to help in that communication phase. So for example, maybe your spouse is not lying to you, maybe your best friend is not lying to you, maybe she's saying something just to be able to make you feel better. So she's not telling you something just to lie, she's just telling you to comfort you. On the flip side, it also opens up the channel of communication. So don't think you know what the situation is. Talk about it and say, is this really true? Is this really what happened?
All right, so were you basically saying that the problems we've got in everyday life today is basically lack of communication?
Communication and trust, exactly.
So where can people find out more about your company? You've got a website, I guess. Are you on Facebook?
Microexpressionsolutions.com, which is the international website.
So that's an international company, and you're operating, on a franchise here in Cyprus?
No, so I'm responsible for the European and US marketing as such, and my partner, she's responsible for the African, Middle East and Asian and Australia markets. So so microexpressionssolutions.com is the actual main website, and they can get all the information with regards to what courses we have, what is it that we do exactly, and what are the new courses that we're doing, like psychology, political writing skills, conflict management, and so on.
That's Anto Parayan giving us an insight into spotting the art of deception. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.